When audiences first saw The Parent Trap in 1961, they fell in love with the dazzling smile of a 14-year-old Hayley Mills. She seemed to embody everything that Walt Disney promised the world: innocence, optimism, and wholesome perfection. But behind the carefully polished image of Disney's Golden Girl was a much older Hollywood story, one that had already played out for generations of women before her, a story of control, exploitation, and survival. Standing quietly in the background of that glittering machine was Maureen O'Hara, the fiery Irish star known as the Queen of Technicolor. Her strength was legendary, her principles unshakable. And what began as a polite professional friendship between two actresses on a Disney set would become a rare act of mentorship, one that may have saved Hayley Mills from being completely broken by the same system that had already consumed so many young stars. In the early 1960s, Hayley Mills was more than just another child actor. She was Disney's living emblem, the cheerful face of post-war family fantasy. With Pollyanna and The Parent Trap, she wasn't merely acting, she was the brand. Her performances felt natural, spontaneous, and pure, as if she really belonged in a world of happy endings and kindly fathers. But off-screen, Disney controlled every inch of her image: the clothing she wore, the words she said in interviews, the way she smiled for photographs. Even the amount she earned was subject to a carefully engineered studio system designed to benefit everyone but the star herself. Hayley was young, idealistic, and trusting. She had no reason to suspect that the studio which had made her famous was also quietly ensuring she would never own the full fruits of her labor. It was in that world that she first crossed paths with Maureen O'Hara, an actress who had already spent decades surviving Hollywood's shifting power games and had learned exactly what it cost to defy them. By the time The Parent Trap went into production, Maureen O'Hara was already a legend. From How Green Was My Valley to The Quiet Man, she had built her reputation not only on beauty and talent but on moral strength. She wasn't the kind of actress who bowed to studio bosses or allowed herself to be typecast as decoration. O'Hara demanded respect in an era when women were told to smile and obey. She fought for better pay, for equal billing, and for the right to play complex characters rather than ornamental ones. That uncompromising nature came at a price. The same Hollywood press that once worshipped her began to whisper that she was difficult, cold, or arrogant. What they really meant was that she refused to be silent. And when she arrived on the Disney lot, she immediately recognized the familiar pattern: the control, the manipulation, and the quiet assumption that everyone, even a child, existed to serve the studio's image. On the surface, The Parent Trap was a light-hearted family comedy, a story about twin sisters who reunite their divorced parents. Behind the camera, however, the production was a tightrope act of egos, contracts, and unspoken power plays. Maureen O'Hara played the twins' mother, a sophisticated, intelligent woman, much like O'Hara herself. Yet when she saw the promotional materials and the salary sheets, she realized something was wrong. Hayley Mills was being paid less than half of what an adult star of her stature would normally receive, even though she was carrying the entire film. O'Hara herself was offered second billing and a lower rate than she had been paid at other studios. When O'Hara quietly questioned this, Disney executives tried to smooth things over. "It's a family picture," one of them reportedly said. "Everyone makes sacrifices for the greater good." But Maureen wasn't buying it. She had made sacrifices before, and she knew exactly who benefited from them. During the shoot, O'Hara kept her frustrations mostly to herself. On set, she was professional, warm, and motherly toward Hayley. But she also watched closely how the studio treated the young girl. Whenever Hayley asked a question about her contract or schedule, the men in suits would smile indulgently, as if a child had spoken out of turn. When she made small mistakes, the whispers were harsher than necessary: "She's lucky Disney discovered her." To Maureen, it felt all too familiar. She had seen that same paternalistic attitude destroy young women's confidence. So she quietly took Hayley aside between takes, speaking not as a co-star, but as a protector. "Don't let them tell you that you're lucky to be here," she reportedly told her. "You earned this. And you have to start asking questions, even if it makes them uncomfortable." That advice stuck. The tension reached its breaking point during the final weeks of production when O'Hara discovered that her billing, the order in which her name appeared on the film posters, had been changed without her consent. Disney had promised her equal billing with Brian Keith, her male co-star. But when the posters were printed, Keith's name appeared alone above the title, while O'Hara's was demoted to second place. For most actresses, that would have been a quiet humiliation to swallow. For Maureen O'Hara, it was war. She marched straight into the executive offices and refused to leave until the contract was honored. According to her memoir, she told them flatly that she would sue if they failed to correct it. "A promise is a promise," she said, "and my name is my word." Behind the scenes, Disney's publicity team panicked. The last thing they wanted was a scandal involving one of their family films. But they also didn't like being challenged by a woman. One executive allegedly warned her, "You'll never work for this studio again." Her response was simple, "Then so be it." O'Hara won the billing dispute, but she was indeed never invited back to Disney. To Hayley Mills, who watched all of this unfold, it was a revelation. It was the first time she had seen someone, especially a woman, stand up to the machine and win. After The Parent Trap wrapped, O'Hara and Mills remained in touch. Their friendship was never loud or performative, it was rooted in mutual respect. O'Hara became a quiet but steady mentor, offering practical lessons that Hayley would come to rely on for the rest of her life. She warned her about contracts that sounded generous but were full of hidden clauses. She taught her that politeness and professionalism were not the same as submission. And she told her, over and over, to learn the value of her own work, not the price others placed on it. At the time, Hayley didn't fully understand the urgency behind that advice. She was still living in the bubble of teenage fame, adored by fans, protected by Disney's image. But years later, when she finally tried to access the fortune she had earned as a child star, she realized what O'Hara had been trying to tell her. When Hayley Mills turned 21, she expected to receive the trust fund that had been built from her Disney earnings. But when the lawyers finished their calculations, the result was devastating. More than 90% of the money had been taken by British tax authorities. Out of what should have been a fortune, she was left with barely enough to buy a small house. It was a blow that few could have endured with grace. Mills later recalled feeling sick with disbelief. She had worked tirelessly, sacrificed her adolescence, and become an international symbol, yet in the end, almost nothing remained. And then she remembered Maureen's warnings about the system, the contracts, the fine print. She was right, Hayley would later admit. She saw what I couldn't. In later interviews, Mills often described O'Hara as tough, but kind. She admired her elegance, her discipline, and her ability to speak truth without apology. When O'Hara died in 2015, Mills wrote a heartfelt tribute, calling her a great lady of immense courage. She remembered how Maureen had encouraged her to pursue theater, to control her career rather than surrender it to agents and executives. It wasn't only professional wisdom, it was personal survival advice. O'Hara had endured gossip, sexism, and isolation, yet never compromised her dignity. She became a living lesson that integrity mattered more than power. And in a small but poetic way, that mentorship came full circle decades later. In 1961, Hayley Mills won the Academy Juvenile Award, a special Oscar given to outstanding child performers. But years later, when she went to retrieve it, she discovered it had vanished. Somewhere along the line, the award had been stolen. The loss was symbolic. It wasn't just a missing trophy, it was another reminder of how much of her early career had been taken from her: money, autonomy, and now, even her recognition. In 2022, the Academy replaced it, publicly honoring her legacy once again. When Hayley accepted the replica, she mentioned gratitude for the people who reminded me to keep my head up when things went wrong. To those who knew her story, that was a quiet nod to Moreno O'Hara. In recent years, social media and tabloid blogs have tried to revive the myth of a rivalry between Hayley Mills and Maureen O'Hara, framing it as a generational clash of egos. But the truth is the exact opposite. There was no feud, no jealousy, no bitterness. There was mentorship, guidance, and courage in the face of a corporate empire that preferred women to remain silent. What actually happened on the Parent Trap set was not a fight between stars, it was a moral stand against a studio system that devalued women's labor. O'Hara, with her Irish fire and unyielding ethics, became the quiet shield that protected a teenage girl from losing even more than she already had. Half a century later, Hollywood still struggles with the same power dynamics. Young performers sign restrictive contracts, major studios and streaming giants still own the images and voices of their stars, and the word "difficult" remains a convenient label for women who refuse to obey. Maureen O'Hara saw it coming long before the rest of the world began to notice. She lived it in an era when resistance could end a career. Yet she fought anyway, not only for herself but for the young women who came after her. Hayley Mills became one of those inheritors, wiser because of that mentorship, scarred but not broken. And she used those lessons to navigate adulthood with grace rather than bitterness. Her later career, on stage, in film, and in writing, was quieter but fully her own. She no longer belonged to Disney's Dream Factory. She belonged to herself. Looking back, it's easy to see the Parent Trap as a charming relic of another age, cheerful, harmless nostalgia. But hidden behind the Technicolor smiles is a small act of rebellion, a quiet defiance that history nearly forgot. It lives in the moments when Maureen O'Hara refused to accept second billing. It lives in the private conversations where she told a frightened teenage girl that she had the right to say no, and it lives in the way Hayley Mills later carried herself, not as a victim of the system, but as someone who had learned to see through it. The world will always remember the Parent Trap for its music, its split-screen magic, and its happy ending. But perhaps the truest legacy of that film is invisible, the passing of courage from one woman to another. In the end, neither fame nor fortune defines greatness. It's the choices made when no one is watching, the moments of quiet resistance that change someone else's life. Maureen O'Hara didn't rescue Hayley Mills in the dramatic way Hollywood likes to show on screen. She simply offered wisdom, respect, and truth, things far rarer and more enduring than applause. And Hayley, for her part, listened. She absorbed those lessons, carried them into her own life, and continued to speak about fairness, gratitude, and perseverance long after the cameras stopped rolling. Their story reminds us that behind every polished Hollywood legend lies another, the unseen network of women who looked out for one another in a world built to exploit them. As time moves on, both women's legacies seem to grow brighter rather than fade. O'Hara's films are studied not only for their beauty but for the independence she modeled. Mills's career, once overshadowed by her Disney persona, is now celebrated for its endurance and authenticity. They represent two ends of the same torch, one who lit the path, and one who carried it forward. So the next time you watch The Parent Trap, notice what the camera doesn't show, the unspoken alliance between a seasoned warrior and a young idealist, the moments when advice whispered between takes became a lifelong shield, the hidden story of resistance inside a world of make-believe. Because that's the real legacy of Hollywood's golden women, not the glamour, not the gossip, but the courage to tell the truth when it costs the most.